you can come in. You can come in.
Does anybody know about this class?
Yeah. Polite people don't understand that we just kind of do what we want to do. Okay.
That's right.
So we're starting with chapter
Linda's the same way.
6 today, and we still have people coming in, so that's great. That's okay. It's fine. We're in Revelation 6, and we're going to start the good stuff now. Of course, the churches with pretty good stuff too, but we're going to be doing start talking about
The seals.
these. Yeah, we're going to be doing the seals, not the art kind of seals, the seals that are on the scroll. And really, this is the place where we're going to start seeing doctrine come into issue. This is from this point on. These are the points where we get a lot of discussion, disagreement, and debate on what this stuff really means. Up until this point, we've been able to kind of skirt some of the issues because everyone pretty much basically believes the same way in terms of what the things mean that we've talked about, the letters to the church, the four creatures. But now we're talking about a lot of symbolism, and there's going to be issues with that. And I'm going to try and do the best I can to give you as many different sides to this as I can. That's not always going to be easy to do, and it's also not. Sometimes it just starts to muddle things up when you try to cover too many different aspects. But we'll do the best we can with it. And then if you want to find out what other people think, you just do a Google search on it, and you can find stuff that's a lot more to the point than I was talking about it here in class. So Revelation 6, and we're talking about the seven seals again. And we did have a little discussion last week about what the scroll was, if it was actually a book or was it a scroll. There's debates on both sides of it because books were being used like we have today at that particular time. Scrolls were still very common, and to a certain extent, some of it depends on how you think this scroll is being read. Does each seal open a different part of the scroll to reveal what's going to happen, or do you have to break all seven off and then open it up to find out what's happening? There's debate on that. Which is it going to be? We talked about how the seven seals, the document was symbolic of the official documents used by the Roman Empire for wills and deeds of property, inheritance, and that this was a very common thing. They would use seven seals. They represented each one of it had seven witnesses. What?
I don't remember talking about any of that. Do y'all?
Oh.
Let me look
I
at
remember
Who were you
the
sitting next to
seals
last
part.
week?
me.
Laura, you weren't here.
Okay, I could have sworn I talked about the seals, the seven seals.
We barely got to the seals.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So let me back up and let you know about the scroll.
Thank you, Laurie.
Okay.
But I'm like,
I'm pretty sure I mentioned it. It may have been like at the very end, and it was quick.
It was at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's debate. Let's go back up. We'll have to delete this out of the video, I guess. There is some belief. There's two schools of thought here. Is that the book is actually a codex, which is a codex is just a fancy word for a book with a cover that you turn the pages, or it's a scroll. And if it was a scroll, it was rolled up and it had two handles on it, and it was opened. It would open here, and then you'd unroll it this way. And then as you unrolled it, you would roll the other part back because you would never be able to hold the whole thing. For instance, the book of Revelation written on a scroll, totally opened up, would have been 15 foot long. Okay, Goliath might be able to hold both ends of that, but that's how that would happen. The seven seals was not an accident. It wasn't like, well, seven seals is the perfection number, so let's do that. It was because this was symbolic of the kind of thing that was common at that particular time in terms of laws. I already said the Romans used this seven sealed process to seal documents that were that dealt with inheritance, whether it was a will or whether it was property. And each of the seals had a different signet on it. Signets how they marked the seal, because there were seven witnesses that were present when the will or the deed or whatever was written up and sealed up. Okay? So it would have taken opening up those 7 seals, and only a person who was qualified to open it could actually open it. We see in Jeremiah, he was given some land, and he sealed up the will or the deed, and when they came back from Babylon, only his relative could open up that seal for that property. So it was designed only one person would be worthy to open up that document. And so that's what they're talking about here when they're going, who's worthy to open this? Because it wasn't just a common, not just anything or any being could open this scroll. There was only one that could be worthy, and it had to be a man. And I don't think we did talk about this, but when you go back to Genesis, and it's kind of interesting to see this connection here.
We did.
We did? Okay.
I took good notes.
Okay, thanks. But we'll review it. So Genesis, we go back to Genesis. What was of all the promises that were given to Adam and Eve, the one thing that was taken away from them was to inherit or subdue the earth. And subdue doesn't mean this idea of getting it under our control and doing, it's that idea of inheriting it, that the earth belonged to man. When man sinned, when Adam sinned, this was taken away from them. They lost that. We lost the inheritance of earth. So in order for the person to open up the scroll to be worthy, it had to be a man because of that promise there. Just like when Boaz and Ruth and Naomi, it took the spell it right?
Go.
No, it's Goel. It's O-E. The Goel is what the term is in Hebrew. It's a redeemer kinsman. It has to be somebody from that family that has a connection with those people to redeem whatever it is, the property or the debt, or but typically it was this idea of property being redeemed back. And if you remember the story of Ruth, in Ruth, Naomi had this property, but her husband, when they moved, they had sold the property, but they wanted to get it back. And so Boaz was the only one who could get the land back for them. And so in this case, the one who was worthy to open up the seals had to be a Goel, had to be a redeemer kinsman. Well, the only way a person could be a redeemer kinsman in this situation was to be a man. So there's only one heavenly being that's man, that's part man. It's Jesus. Okay? So again, this is why studying the Old Testament is so important, is because you start to see what these things are here. You start to understand, okay, that's why Jesus is. It's all connected. It's not like bits and pieces all thrown together and making some wild story. It's all connected here. And the more we understand the Old Testament, the more we're going to understand Revelation. Okay? And it's like I said before. You read the last chapter of Gone with the Wind and you go, well, what's going on here? You know, does it make any... Of course, you know, you may not want to read all those chapters. Watch the movie instead and then read the last chapter. But you get the idea. You read more than just the last chapter, because you got to understand how you get to that point. All right, so this is what's going on here in heaven. This is why Jesus is worthy, because he was a man who was sinless. It took a man who was sinless to do this. And when Adam was promised all this stuff, he was sinless. He didn't lose it until after he sinned. Okay? Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've got the scroll. It's got 7 seals on it. And we're going to go through this. The one thing I did want to mention was the scroll was written on every side, right? It said writing on inside and outside. That was very uncommon. It did not happen because the scrolls were made from papyrus, and I'm just drawing this quickly. What they did was they took the papyrus and they would cut it out to length and beat it down, and then they would connect them, okay, and beat them again, dry it out. But they would have 2 layers. One layer would be going up and down, another layer would be going sideways, horizontal, and the horizontal one would be the one you would write on, right? Because that's the way we write, it's on the horizontal. You know, if it was Japanese, they would switch it because they go up and down, or down, yeah, thank you, vertically. So typically it was on the inside where the papyrus was going horizontal that they would write. The outside was just way too rough, and it would go in the wrong direction. The grain would be going up and down and trying to go across it. So anyway, this document was important enough that it was written on both sides of it, and it was full. There was no room left. So we don't know exactly what that said, but it was important stuff because it filled the whole thing up. There was no empty space. Okay? So, I think that was all I wanted to say about those things.
Can I ask something?
You sure can.
All right, but when they rolled it up,
The rough side was on the outside.
right, so that's what preserved it, right?
Yeah. It was kind of the cover.
Okay.
But in this case, there was stuff written on the outside of it.
Oh, there was.
There was,
Okay.
yes, because when John looks at it, he said it was written within and without. So it was writing, the whole thing was covered with writing, okay? All right,
I
so,
wonder about the order when they were writing, because I know that they wrote from right to left,
right,
so.
to let,
Yeah, yeah.
Correct.
So when
He
they
was
flipped it
left-handed.
over, we're trying to read it.
no, I think what they did was they're, and that caused me some issues too. I think what happens is when they open it up, they're reading a section, a page, if you will, and they're going from, this is page 1, then this would be page 2, this would be page 3, which is opposite of what we would do, right?
Mhm.
Because we would have to open it up this way and read this direction.
Left
We
to
read,
right.
right?
Well, yeah, but from
If
your.
they wrote it
from
that way.
your-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm just trying to.
either way, when it rolled up, they only read what was uncovered. They didn't unroll the whole thing and then start here and go back over. So
Yeah.
my understanding was, and I may have misunderstood what he said. My understanding was that they would hold the left one and unroll the. So maybe this is like a toilet roll, and they had a piece of paper and they just pulled it. You know, like you do with, if you put a toilet paper and you pull it.
Right.
Maybe that, I don't know. I'm not being funny. I'm thinking maybe that's what it was. It was on a
Makes
roll and they were able to
sense.
pull it.
Yeah.
Because we see it as like everything, like it met in the middle. But that's not what that's apparently not what they did. We have that vision of that, but that's not what
But if
they
they rolled
did.
it all the
They
way
rolled it
up.
all up onto one roll, and they had the two handles, but it wasn't like you opened it up and you weren't in the middle of the book. You opened it up, whether it was this way, and then you started reading, which was maybe what they said was you hold it with the left and then open with the right, which would be them reading from right to left. Because then your book would start here and go all the way over to here, as opposed to starting here and going all the way over there. I don't know. This is an. Ask your friend when she comes to town.
There's a Jewish church in Jonesboro. Let's go.
I could call them, couldn't I?
Yes,
It's a synagogue.
synagogue, excuse me.
Okay. All right. Any other deep questions about scrolls?
Oh, yeah.
This one, when I taught it Wednesday night, when I
Sorry.
taught it on the Wednesday night class, that was the same sticking point for me. It was like, it didn't make sense. So I don't know if he misstated it, or if I'm just not picturing in my mind correctly.
Well, I
Because
was just thinking, well, if he rolled it out to be this section, so does he flip it over and then read the back side?
my understanding is
Or
that
he unrolls and reads that whole front side and then flips it over and starts like unscrolling it from the back side.
Yeah, that is a
I don't
good
know, it
question.
doesn't really matter, I guess, so. But because.
that question I don't have an answer for, and I'm not sure that I don't recall them actually reading the scroll. And maybe that's where they get the bull judgments and thank you, and the trumpets from, is that information. But again, that's a question, that question is answered based on what you think takes place. Do each of the first 7 happen as you pop the seal, or does it happen not until you open all 7 and then that's revealed on the inside.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Mhm. Okay, go ahead.
And I have my opinion,
Sorry.
but anyway,
I'm sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. All right, so let's take a look at. This is the first horse. Okay, verse 1 of chapter 6. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold, a white horse, and the one who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. All right, we're going to be taking a look here at what is traditionally they're called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. If you're a Notre Dame fan, they used to have 4 running backs called the 4 horsemen. I guess that's because they dealt death and doom. But anyway, and we're going to have each one of them is going to be responsible for a different impact on Earth. Okay, now the preterists, who are the group that believe, the theologians that believe the rapture occurs before the 7 years of tribulation, believe that at this point believers are in heaven. We've been raptured already. Okay? So we're not here when this stuff goes on. That's what the preterists believe, and that's the most common belief. I shouldn't say most common, but it's very popular. It's not like a way out there in outfield. It's a very prevalent viewpoint. Is that at this point, before the 4 horsemen, the rapture has taken place. Okay, so that's happened first, and now we have the 4 horsemen, which is a product of the 7 seals. All right? So, what's the significance of this first one? We've got this, the first one, I don't know why right over here. He's on a white horse. He has a bow, and he has a crown. Right? Now, again, this is right off the bat. We start with controversy. Typically in the Bible, what does white represent?
Purity.
Purity. So, what do you think? A lot of people think who or what this is. There's kind of 2 schools of thought.
I'm assuming some people think it's Jesus.
Right. So some people think it's Jesus. Yeah. Some people think it's. Let's go ahead. It's Jesus. So we're going to say. I'm going to do over here. The first one is Jesus. The early church thought that it was the man and the horse represented 2 different things, and that it was the gospel and Christ, and Christ was writing the gospel. Okay. Now, the problem with this, and again, we're using Bible pictures. The problem with this is that the rest of the horses are not going to be good things. All right? So you have 4 horsemen, and if you say the first one is Jesus, then he's being associated with the evil that's about to come on the earth. The other thing is that when we go back to this real quick here, it says one of the living creatures says to Jesus what? Come. So you have an angel, or some form of an angel, one of the creatures around the throne, telling Jesus what to do, which doesn't make sense biblically. It'd be like an angel telling God to go, to whatever. So that's one of the issues here with this one, with the idea that it's Jesus. Another belief is that it's the Antichrist. And that's the one I tend to fall on, and here's why. If indeed this is the beginning of the 7 years, what does the, well, let me do it this way. The Antichrist, just like everything Satan does, is a copy of Christ. Okay? And when it says he's going to be, he will be, went out conquering and to conquer, you would think, well, he's going to use war to conquer, right? Right? Isn't that what you would think? The problem is, the bow, there's no arrows. So the bow shows that he has the power, has the ability, but he doesn't use war to conquer. So if you don't use war to conquer, what do you use?
Evil.
Words. Yeah. I mean, you're using words to create peace. Instead of, you see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no arrows. He's got a bow, and the crown is also an issue in terms of if we look at Jesus. The Greek, change it on you. The Greek word is Stephanos, and Stephanos is a laurel kind of crown, and it's associated with athletic victory, not royalty. A Stephanos was given to winners in the Olympic Games. It's just an olive branch thing that they put around their head. And in Greek times, they would wear that pretty much everywhere they went, because wherever they went, they would get free food and free boarding. I mean, they were, for a year, they were it. Okay? Excuse me. So, if it was Jesus, the crown wouldn't be a laurel crown. And it would be a diadem, which is the crown of royalty. All right? So, we've got, and this is the one, like I said, this is the one I fall on. I'm not saying that that's gospel. I'm just the one I fall on. So we've got the first horse and rider going out, and what they're doing is they're preaching a false gospel that's creating this false peace. Okay? And he's masquerading, in a sense, he's masquerading as the Messiah. All right? He looks like him, talks like him, but he doesn't have his power. He doesn't have his royalty. All right? Any questions or comments on that? Bert, you got a comment? You got your I'm thinking look on your face.
I'm just thinking.
Okay, just think. Okay, just think. All right, we can always come back to it. All right, so so that's the debate on the white horse. You know, is it the Antichrist? Is it Jesus? Or is it the gospel that goes out? Okay. Now, before we get much further into this, the four horsemen are mentioned to a certain extent earlier in the Bible. And in Zechariah 6:1-6, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Zechariah says in verse 1, "Now I raised my eyes again and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were going out from between the 2 mountains. And the mountains were bronze mountains. With the first chariot were red horses, with the second chariot black horses, with the third chariot white horses, and with the fourth chariot strong spotted horses." And we're going to see the exact same thing in Revelation. Okay? The other thing that you might want to know is that at this particular time in history, it wasn't like the West, where everybody who could get around had a horse. Horses were not common. They were used by soldiers. They were not as easily available, and so they were weapons of war. So this horse going out represents war. It doesn't represent peace. Okay? So you got all that symbolism in just this one situation. And again, we see in Zechariah where these guys go out and they wage war against the corners of the world. All right. Any questions? And so that's what they looked like. And in this one, they were pulling chariots, And again, the only reason you used a chariot was for war. So this is going out to war against evil in this case. So these guys are going out to war. There's no chariot, but it's the same idea. All right. So let's go on to the second one, which is the red horse. Verse 3. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and the people would kill one another, and a large sword was given to him. So you've got the next one. I'm not making this. So the first one is the white, and the second one is red. And the red horse does what? Well, he removes peace. Okay? And when you remove peace, who produces peace in the world? God, yeah, right. Satan can't produce peace. So when peace is pulled out, then the world's going to go even nuttier than it is now. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. But peace is going to be removed. So again, it kind of doesn't make sense if it's Jesus going out and then the next guy comes and takes away peace. It doesn't go with the message that Christ would have, right? So the upshoot of all this is that wars will increase, that peace will be removed, and that man will rise up against man. All right. So, and he has a sword. And this isn't one of those cute little swords that that Errol Flynn used to use in the movies to have little sword fights and stuff. This is a broadsword. It's heavy, and when it strikes, it's pretty much the end. I don't think you would survive a broadsword. It's got a big blade on it. So there's going to be death because of this, and we're going to see as we go through this that these build on each other. Okay. Peace is removed. Let me put peace removed. It would make sense that it would be a product, as peace being removed, be a product of whatever it is that the white horse guy is selling. Okay? Yeah? No? All right. So, just see if I had anything else. All right, so, and we talk about the red. What does red typically signify in the Bible? What's the one thing it Blood. Yeah, so this is blood. And that's what's going to happen because the wars are going to increase. All right? So the next horse is the black horse. Verse 5, when he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, the black horse, and the one who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Yeah. All right, so the third one is the black horse, and he has the scales, and scales are associated with commerce. All right, so now we've got all these wars going on, and typically when wars take place, you have an issue with the economies, right? You're going to have issues with economies. So this is going to be impacted. And in this particular instance, we're talking about food. So what is all this? How does this translate into today? If you were to take the denarius is interesting. I looked it up. The first time I looked it up, it was like $3 plus. That's what it would equal. Because some of your versions may say a penny, but it's really not a penny. But then I looked it up that was 2017, so I looked it up for 2021, and it's gone down in value.
Yes.
I guess the Romans are printing money that they should be printing. But anyway, it's worth $2.60. Okay, and a denarius was what the average man earned in a day at the time John's writing. That was his daily wage, was $2.60 in today's dollar. Okay, so what that meant was that it was going to get so bad that a man would have to work one day to buy enough wheat to feed himself. Just himself. Now, that was if he bought wheat. If he bought barley, which was considered a lesser grain than wheat, then he could feed more. I don't know. The other versions I've seen said it was 3 quarts instead of, did it say 3 quarts?
Pounds. 6 pounds.
Oh, well,
Mine says 3 quarts.
okay, so it is 3 quarts. Yes, okay, never mind. I was wrong. So 3 quarts of barley. So this will buy 1 quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. In other words, the average person is not going to have enough money to worry about whether they're going to buy a new car or not, or buy a new house, or buy the newest, fanciest shoes or clothes or anything else. They're going to be working every single day just to have enough to eat. Okay. So, and roughly, what this is equivalent to is 10 to 12 times the normal cost. So the inflation is going to go to 10 to 12 times what it should be. In other words, theoretically, they should be able to buy enough wheat for 26 cents. If you go 10 times, right? Now it's $2.60, which was a lot of money back then, obviously. Not so much now. I'm not sure you can. I guess maybe you can buy the nasty all white bread for less than $2.60.
I'm not sure about
A loaf of bread costs $3.16.
Anyway, so the economy is going to be impacted. Again, this is a okay. So we have the first horseman going out preaching a false peace. The second horseman follows him and removes what peace there is in the world from the world. And then the third one goes out, and that's when the economy causes problems, inflation. This is worldwide. And think about places let's think about countries where $2.60 isn't close to what they make in a day. I mean, there are parts of the world where, they might make that in a week. And it's going to be devastating for the world. And we'll see how devastating here in a minute. All right, any questions on the black horse? Now we have what's often called the pale horse. The fourth seal is death. Verse 7, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and the one who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and famine and plague and by the wild animals of the earth. So this horse, it says that it's ashen or pale. The Greek word is chloros, which means green. So it's really kind of a sickly green. Like, you know, if you pull meat out of the refrigerator, it's been in there a little bit too long. It's got that green on it.
Yeah.
That's like what this guy looks like, yeah. Like our bacon we had last night.
It looked dead.
It tasted fine.
Deathly.
Yes.
I said like Jessica was last Sunday.
Oh, she was green. And it was like our bacon. Anyway, so the fourth horse goes out, and again, this is going to make sense because the only product of all this is going to be death, right? And the death is going to the horse is bringing with it death and Hades. Now, from John's perspective, he would have been writing with a Jewish viewpoint, Hebrew viewpoint, so he probably is thinking more of Sheol, okay, which is the Jewish place of the dead, okay? So he's not necessarily bringing the dead people with him. He's just saying the people that die are going to Hades, okay? They're not going to heaven. They're going to Hades. And the product of all four of these is the death of 1/4 of the world's population. So let's just say for giggles that the population of the world is 80 million. Is that too little? It should be 80 billion, isn't it? 80 billion. Okay. You'd say 8.
He's on there.
8 billion people. 1/4 of that would be 2 billion. That's how many people will remain at the end of these 4 horses. 6 billion people. Okay. And I was thinking about this last night, and we probably wouldn't have 8 billion people had we not developed artificial fertilizers in the world. Because the ground right now, the soil is so depleted. If you were to, even now with the manufactured, created fertilizer, the nutrient level of the food coming out of the ground is far less than it was back in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as nutritional as it was, and that, again, that's with all the chemical fertilizers. But the only reason that we're able to produce as much food as we can is because of the artificial fertilizers. And you think about the biggest producer of grains, corn, wheat, and all that stuff is who? Us. Us. Okay? And so you're talking about a situation here where now the food demand, you would think the price of food would go down because your market isn't as large. Well, no, it would be the other way, it'd go up. Anyway, you're not having to feed as many people. And in theory, that many people may not be there had we not had artificial fertilizers. Does that make sense? Okay. So the product of all this is that there are going to be that quarter of a billion of that quarter of the population will be gone. Now, these guys operate under how do they operate?
The beasts tell them to come.
Right. So the beasts tell them to come. You got the 4 beasts that I've kind of ignored, and these are the ones we talked about last week that were around the throne. But the authority is given them by God. So again, they can't function without God, without being. They come before God, and then through the beast, the creatures, God tells them to go. Right. So we're seeing the beginning of judgment here, and it's coming from God. It's not just coming willy-nilly. Now, at this point, we've had 4 judgments. We've had, there's 21 judgments in all, and we've had 4 of them. The one school of thought is that the pre-trib rapture group says that we're not here. We're not here for any of this stuff. And I can't necessarily prove that that's not true or that that's not valid. But let's think about what's going on. If we look back at the Old Testament and we look at people that were spared, let's go back to Israel, because that's the one we most recently talked about. In the 10 plagues in Egypt, was Israel spared all 10 of them?
No.
No, they weren't.
3, wasn't
They experienced 3, and the other 7 they were spared from. Now, the first 3 that they were a part of could be called natural. They weren't necessarily supernatural events. If you remember when we read, it said they had never seen it this bad. So they had seen things like this before, just never this bad. And so what we're looking at here with the 4 horsemen is the world's experiencing things that they've experienced before, but it's not God's wrath that they're experiencing. When Lot and his family were pulled out of Sodom, they were spared God's wrath, right? When Noah and his family were put in the ark, they were spared God's wrath. But when bad weather comes, you and I aren't protected from tornadoes or flooding, right? Or blizzards, right? Everybody's watching Say hi. That was Nancy walking in front of the camera.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I forget about that thing.
So if we look at these first 4 these horsemen, first 4 seals, they are not unnatural, supernatural events. This is nature, or nature being taken over by evil and jacked up, but they're not supernatural, like we will see coming up. So there are some, and some who believe that at this point is when the rapture takes place. That we will be here for the first 4, because these don't represent God's wrath. These are just God removing himself from the world and nature being able to go wild. Okay? The other thing that I need to make sure we recognize here is that with this 4th one, this also includes animals. And I'm not talking about animals being killed. I'm talking about people being killed by animals. And I think that when we look at what's happening in the world now, when I was a kid, you never heard about bears walking through neighborhoods, or them encroaching on foxes and coyotes, and just encroaching on human area. They stayed in their own way, in their own places. But now we're starting to see them get more and more, and in areas where, like India and Africa, where elephants are becoming much more dangerous because they're not afraid of going into the villages now. Okay, and so we're hearing more deaths occurring because of animal attacks, and that's part of what's going on here. We will see this as part of the 4th horseman. Animals will also be killing human beings. Okay? Yes, sir.
Well, I just got a question with this. Now, in the Gospels, Jesus is talking about, before these end times come, there's going to be birth pangs. There's going to be all of that. So when you think in the Gospel where Jesus is talking about this, he's talking like this, we're in this section right here?
Yeah, that's the way I see it. Is that every time we move down, things get ratcheted up. And that this first guy brings a false peace. And everybody's going to be going, right. But then it's going to increase Mark Carell does this, he does this graph. And as we move through the judgments, this is the first one here, and this is the 21st there. The severity increases as we get closer and closer to the last one. Okay? So God just doesn't like smack us, and he works his way. And what's the purpose of this? Why does God do it this way?
People wake up.
So we'll
Yeah,
wake
yeah,
up,
yeah,
open
so that
our
people will be
eyes.
saved. Okay? And this will also be a time, so Tom Bradford believes that it's at this point that the rapture takes place. Because once we get to the fifth seal, things go from being natural to supernatural. And we're going to start seeing things that we don't see. Okay? And he believes this is the point where we get raptured. And one of the arguments he makes is why would Jesus tell us to be faithful, to be overcomers, if we weren't going to be going through this kind of thing? I mean, right now you and I aren't really overcomers. There's nothing for us really to overcome in a sense. There is, but I'm just saying overtly, we're not being stones aren't being thrown at us as we're walking to our cars or whatever. Our houses aren't being burned because we're Christians. We don't face those kinds of things. So there's going to be a period here where those that are believers that are there are going to go through a difficult time. Okay? But the promise here is that it's only for a short time, and that when the really bad stuff hits, we won't be here. Okay? And I kind of tend to go to that direction because I think that it makes sense in terms of what I see in Exodus. That there were things that were, like we talked about, the first 3 plagues, everybody experienced that. It wasn't until after the fourth one on, that it was just the Egyptians. Okay, because God's wrath is not for us. It's for the ones who have rejected Christ. Okay? Now, you can disagree with that, and that's fine. I'm just saying that's what I feel like after looking through all this stuff. All right, so go
I
ahead.
just got one more
Sure
question
thing.
with this. The 4 horsemen,
Uh-huh.
I struggle with that. Is it strictly symbolism? Are these 4 actual, like, maybe demonic agents? Or I've always struggled with, what is this?
Yeah. I think that in this, remember that what we're talking about is a human being looking at this and trying to describe what's taking place. Mark Carell believes that all the horses represent is swiftness. So it's going to happen swiftly. But I think that it's a sense where there is an agent who appears before God who is in charge of this aspect of evil. That this is what his responsibility is. And he may have been I don't know. And that's where we start getting into trouble when we start trying to look at, is this symbolism? Is it really a horse? It's not really a horse. But this idea that the horse represented to the ancient writers did represent swiftness, because if you had horses in battle at that time, you had an advantage. When King David goes out with his soldiers, what's he riding?
Horse.
No, he's not.
No, that's right, he was on foot.
He was on a donkey.
Oh.
Yes.
That's how
And
he
at
came,
that
I know
point,
that's how he came home.
yes.
Yeah.
And at that point, only royalty and leaders rode donkeys. And then they get horses introduced, and then donkeys become, second-class aminals, and then the horses take over. Okay, so you wouldn't have the saloon keeper with a horse like they do in the Old West. He hops on his horse and rides off. There were no, so it does represent a certain. Horses are powerful. They're quick. What?
Betting the saloon keeper makes a lot of money.
That he does too. He does too. That's why you had one in every town, and some too, and some too. But the idea here is that I think this is symbolism in the sense of there is a, for lack of a better term, a demon or a fallen angel whose responsibility it is to do this. We got a weather alert, okay? So let's see what Jesus has to say about this. If we look in Matthew 24, 1 through 6, it says that Jesus answered and said to them, "See to it that no one misleads you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will mislead many people. And you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end." Okay, so there's a sense of, okay, this is the beginning. If you, where did we read first? The first thing was misleading. That would go with the white horse guy, right?
Right.
Okay. And then wars and rumors of wars. Wouldn't that go with this guy?
Yes, the red.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it would rise against nation. That was the idea of peace being pulled out. Nation would rise against nation. And kingdom against kingdom. And there will be, what, famines and earthquakes
Black horse.
in various places. But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. Okay? So that kind of goes to what you were asking, Bert. And verse 9. Then they will hand you over to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations because of my name. So even Jesus is saying we're going to have these birth pains, and it's after these that you'll start to be killed and persecuted. All right? Then they will, verse 10, and that time many will fall away, and they will betray one another and hate one another. So this idea is that we'll find out really who believers are and who aren't believers. Okay?
What was that scripture in Matthew?
24.
24, 1 through 6. Yeah. And verse
Except
11.
We're on 13, 11.
What?
Except we're on 11. It's past 6.
Well, that's a good point. Thanks for pointing that out to me.
You're welcome.
And many false prophets will rise up and mislead many people, and because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will become cold. But the one who endures to the end is the one who will be saved. And I think probably I went past 6 because it covered all the 4 horsemen. Okay, so even Jesus is talking about what these guys are. He just didn't call them the 4 horsemen. Okay? It's a lot of stuff. Bert?
I don't know. It's just I have trouble putting that there, especially with one of those judgments. What, a fourth of humankind?
No, it's the total. It's the total of all 4 that will be 1/4. If you read
Yeah,
the
but
verse,
I mean, okay, the church is here. God's going to wipe out a quarter of all people during this time. That sounds like a pretty
don't believe.
severe judgment to be having your church stick around for if he's sparing us from the future judgment. And I know it gets really rough as this book goes on, but I'm like, a fourth of mankind, he's keeping us here for this?
well,
Will
again,
they get wiped out? That just seems really, that doesn't really jive in my head.
but
Go ahead. I'm
and
sorry,
I
I'm not
understand,
giving
and I
you
understand
a
what you're
chance.
saying. I do understand what you're saying. I think the difference here, though, is that these are not necessarily supernatural events like we're going to read about. These are things that you and I mean, let's look at persecution. Persecution's taking place all over the world. People are dying because of their faith.
Yeah.
We're not. But during this time,
Yes.
we will. And there are parts of the world where they constantly have natural disasters, earthquakes. You look at the number of earthquakes, the number of earthquakes has increased every decade. So I understand what you're saying, but why would, let me ask the question, let me ask it this way. Why would God allow believers to be here during this time period?
So we can be alive in the world.
Exactly. So that we would be martyrs. And not in the sense that we would give our lives, but martyr means witness, testimony. So that we would still be here to be a testimony of our faith. We would be overcomers. You're not an overcomer if you don't go through difficult times. Right? And again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm trying to explain that other side of it. And so when we look at situation, like I said, when we looked at Egypt, and we looked at those first three plagues, God very easily could have said, well, I don't want anything to happen to my people, so I'll protect them from all 10 of them. But there's an aspect to the witness that they will, and there's also, the other aspect of this is that, what did Jesus say would happen during these 4 times, these 4 seals? Many would fall away. It's the idea of, I'm going to say that kind of, it's this idea of finding out, trying by fire, who is committed and who isn't. Who's really a believer and who was just doing it because it was easy to do in the country that you lived in. Or there was some financial perk for being a Christian and people thought you were a Christian. You had a little fish on your thing, so well, I'm going to use you because you're a Christian. You find out they really weren't. They just put the fish on there to make you think they were. And so this is a time of trial for believers as well. And if you go back to the 7 letters, every church was told they would have to be overcomers if they wanted to receive the reward. Okay? And that is, the point you're making is one that people have, that a lot of theologians wrestle with, is this idea, God putting, God allowing evil or creating evil in the world. But, and I have a quote for that from Isaiah where God says, I make the light, I make the darkness. So, in a sense, he's given these people, you overcome during this period of time, and you're going to be a true believer. There's not going to be any faking it. Okay? And that's going to be a time for us to be a witness to the rest of the world of, I mean, when we look at the history of the church, when did the church grow? And I'm using that term in quotations. When did Christianity, when did the Messianic church grow the most? Under persecution. It wasn't once, I mean, when you look at the history of the church, after the persecution period goes over, how do we get converts? We persecute other people. I mean, that's a broad statement. But look at what happened in the rest of the world. Are you going to be a Christian or not? No? Okay, you're dead. You had to become a Christian in a lot of periods of history if you wanted to survive. And it wasn't until we have you look at the church in India. It's one of the fastest growing group of believers in the world, but they're under huge persecution. Okay? So I do think that if we look at it from God's perspective and from the Old Testament, what we saw through history, this is him separating the wheat from the chaff, the wheat from the tares. You may look like wheat, but you're not, because you can't hold up. Okay? And again, I'm not saying that your viewpoint, there are a lot of theologians that agree with you, Bert. I'm just trying to share the other side of it with you. Okay? All right. So when we take a look, and we're going to have to finish here. Yeah. We've got one of the things that we see here is that the typical biblical association with the colors is different in Revelation, which would make sense. So, for instance, the color white in the Bible is the bride of Christ, surrender, harvest, light, righteousness, conquest, victory, all that stuff. Okay. But in Revelation, white represented here deception, conquest, and peace. So it's this idea of I'm bringing peace, but it's false peace. It's not righteous peace. But everywhere else in the Bible, and later on when we see Christ on a white horse, it's going to be righteousness. Okay? The red, and I thought this was kind of interesting. The Hebrew word for red is udem. Or Audem. That sounds a lot like Adam, right? Adam. Adam was born from the dust, the earth. So it means, it's red clay is what it means.
Georgia red color.
Yeah. Anyway, it represents in the Bible blood of Jesus, love of God, blood of the Lamb, atonement, and salvation. Whereas in Revelation here with the 4 horsemen, it's blood and hatred of others. So again, this is Satan taking what God uses and perverting it. It means just the opposite for Satan and evil than it does for God. Black is darkness, sin, earth, affliction, humiliation, calamity, death, and mourning. It's the same thing in Revelation. It means the same thing. And then green, or chloros, in the Bible, green is praise, growth, prosperity, new beginning, flourishing, and restoration. In Revelation, it means death. So you see how Satan is going to take it and just, he's going to take everything God, it's perverted. It's the mirror image, if you will, or the other side of the coin, opposite of what God has created. It's going to have the opposite effect. All right, we'll stop there. Any comments or questions?
I was just thinking of the pandemic we've just gone through. It was worldwide, and what a test it was to many. You know, is your faith in God, are you gonna stand true and?
She said what?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't,
I mean, not that it applied to that, but I was just thinking of what a test that was to the world. I mean, cause it was something that hit worldwide, and it hit a lot of those areas. You know, it hit the economy.
yeah, and we, you know, and I think that to a certain extent, conveniently, those places weren't talked about in the news. It was always focused on